Omar Nelson Bradley, in the sweltering heat of August 1942, found himself alone in the small, sparsely furnished office at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Outside, the relentless roar of trucks transporting troops and artillery across the sandy training grounds created a constant background hum, punctuated occasionally by the distant clatter of rifles from live-fire exercises. At 39, Bradley had ascended rapidly through the ranks, his promotions reflecting both a strategic mind and a rare blend of calm decisiveness. Yet the weight of responsibility pressed down on him with the subtle inevitability of a gathering storm. Before him lay piles of reports detailing troop readiness, artillery positioning, supply chains, and intelligence estimates of potential Axis activity in North Africa and Europe. The stack of papers seemed to grow heavier as he read, each page a reminder of the thousands of lives that could be affected by his decisions. "I do not fear the enemy itself," he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible over the distant thunder of training artillery. "I fear the consequences of my command. I fear failing the men I am entrusted to lead." In this quiet, private moment, Bradley confronted a fear that few outside the halls of military command could understand. A fear born not of personal weakness, but of an acute moral responsibility to human life in the midst of unprecedented global war. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Chuck Smith, his closest aide, had been observing Bradley from the doorway, hesitant to intrude but unable to ignore the palpable tension radiating from the young general. Smith had served alongside Bradley in various capacities and had learned to recognize these silent moments as critical windows into his commander's mind. "Sir," Smith began cautiously, stepping into the office, "you've already done everything possible to prepare the men. The briefings, the exercises, the logistics, they're ready." Bradley lifted his head, his eyes shadowed by doubt and sleepless nights. "Yes, Chuck," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "But readiness on paper is not enough. I fear making decisions that could cost lives, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands. If we err, I am afraid that my judgment alone will not be sufficient to navigate the chaos we are about to enter." Smith nodded silently, recognizing both the weight of Bradley's self-imposed burden and the extraordinary foresight of a man who understood that command in war was more than strategy. It was an existential responsibility to those who relied on him for survival. Bradley's fears were compounded by the recent reports from Allied operations in North Africa. Operation Torch was still in the planning stages, but intelligence from preliminary reconnaissance and British advisors revealed the complexity of amphibious landings across Morocco and Algeria. Early landings described by the British were chaotic. Men struggled to navigate unfamiliar terrain, supply lines faltered, and units became separated during night movements. Bradley pored over these accounts in meticulous detail, imagining the reactions of the men he would one day command. He pictured soldiers from small Midwestern towns, barely out of high school, stepping onto foreign sands, faces pale with fear, eyes wide with the enormity of what awaited them. "Can I make the right decisions to keep them alive?" he whispered to himself, his pen hovering over his journal as he scribbled reflections on tactics, morale, and human endurance. His fear was the kind born from empathy, the deep, almost unbearable awareness of human fragility under fire. In his moments of reflection, Bradley often recalled the advice and mentorship of General George C. Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff, who had guided him since his days at West Point and through early assignments. In a private meeting at the Pentagon on October 3rd, 1942, Marshall leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Omar," he said, his voice firm but calm, "fear is part of command. What defines you is not the absence of fear, but how you act in spite of it." Bradley nodded, absorbing the words while wrestling internally with the enormity of responsibility. "Yes, sir," he replied, though the gnawing anxiety within him did not dissipate. Marshall's counsel offered guidance, yet could not erase the visceral dread of sending men into combat against a well-trained, experienced enemy in a theater as unpredictable as North Africa. Bradley understood that his fear, while common among commanders, was a signal of the weight of history pressing down on him, a reminder that every tactical choice carried human consequences that could ripple for decades. The fear Bradley experienced was compounded by the tangible failures he witnessed during training exercises at Fort Bragg. During a simulated assault on a mock village in early September 1942, Bradley observed units faltering under stress. Soldiers hesitated under simulated fire, Artillery misfired due to equipment malfunction, and communication lines between units collapsed in confusion. Bradley's face darkened as he scribbled notes furiously, aware that the theoretical exercises revealed real weaknesses in preparation, leadership, and discipline. He realized that command was not a matter of issuing orders but of anticipating chaos, responding to unpredictability, and ensuring that individual soldiers could act effectively under pressure. "The theory of command," he wrote in his journal that evening, "is nothing without the lived reality of men facing danger." Morale weighed heavily on Bradley's mind. Letters from families of soldiers began arriving in the thousands, filled with hope, fear, and appeals for protection. One letter, dated September 15, 1942, from a mother in Ohio, asked, "Will my son return safely?" The words struck Bradley with a weight that few outside command could understand. In reply, he penned measured words of reassurance. Yet, privately, he agonized over fragility of morale under the stress of battle. He feared that a single tactical error could shatter the confidence of soldiers who had placed absolute trust in his leadership. The human element of command, he realized, was as critical as logistics, firepower, or strategy, perhaps more so. Bradley often reflected on the lessons of history, particularly the experiences of General John Pershing in World War I. Pershing had emphasized strict discipline tempered with empathy, balancing tactical rigor with concern for the well-being of soldiers. Bradley worried that no amount of study could prepare him for the moral and emotional challenges of leading men into combat. Could he remain firm yet humane? Could he inspire courage without glorifying death? These questions haunted him nightly, shaping every decision as he balanced training schedules, operational planning, and personal reflection. Fear, Bradley knew, was not just a warning. It was an essential component of moral leadership. As the months of preparation unfolded, Bradley's fear evolved. During planning sessions for Operation Torch at Casablanca in October 1942, he sat alongside Lieutenant General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander. Eisenhower, noting Bradley's tense demeanor, offered reassurance. "Omar, it is not the absence of fear, but the disciplined action despite fear that defines a great commander." Bradley exhaled, internalizing the lesson even as the tension of responsibility pressed down on him. Every map, every troop schedule, and every supply manifest became a meditation on life and death, on the consequences of decisions made under uncertainty. Indecision became another source of anxiety. During staff meetings with experienced commanders such as General Lucian Truscott and Major General Troy Milton, Bradley debated the potential outcomes of supply shortages, miscommunication, and enemy ambushes. Each discussion, though theoretical, carried immense weight in his mind. "If I hesitate," he whispered into the quiet hours, "it will be the men who suffer, not I." He recalled stories of World War I officers whose delays led catastrophe, lessons etched into military history that he could not ignore. Command, he realized, was as much about decisiveness as knowledge, as much about moral courage as strategic acumen. The human element of leadership remained central to his fear. Soldiers were not abstract units. They were sons, brothers, and husbands. In private letters written in November 1942, Bradley reflected on the expressions of men he had observed during training, their eyes alight with determination, yet clouded by uncertainty. "There's courage here, yes," he wrote, "but also fear. If I fail, it will be on my conscience for the rest of my life." These reflections illustrate that Bradley's fear was not cowardice but empathy, an understanding that leadership carried immense moral stakes that extended beyond the battlefield to the hearts and minds of his men. Staff exercises provided both relief and stress. Bradley would pose hypothetical scenarios. What if communications fail? What if we are outflanked? What if our supply line is cut? Each answer from Truscott, Middleton, or other staff officers was both a reassurance and a reminder of complexity. Listening carefully, Bradley synthesized perspectives while absorbing the enormity of responsibility. Leadership, he realized, was not just giving orders. It was understanding consequences, anticipating failure, and remaining steadfast amid uncertainty. International scrutiny heightened his anxiety. Allied leaders, particularly British generals such as Bernard Montgomery, were evaluating American preparedness. Early meetings revealed stark differences in strategic priorities. Montgomery's cautious, methodical approach clashed with Bradley's desire for aggressive, flexible action. "We must act decisively but prudently," Montgomery emphasized. Bradley nodded respectfully but privately feared that mistakes could not only cost soldiers' lives but also strain fragile alliances. The weight of public and political accountability added another layer to his ever-present fear. By late December 1942, as troops prepared for Operation Torch landings, Bradley's focus shifted slightly. Fear transformed into a sense of purpose. He understood that his decisions would coordinate soldiers across continents, languages, and cultures, American troops, British allies, French resistance, and local civilians. This intricate web of responsibility magnified both anxiety and resolve. Leadership was no longer theoretical. It was tangible, demanding, and morally unavoidable. Bradley's fear, though constant, became a tool to sharpen judgment and empathy. Even in solitude, he observed his soldiers at night during training drills, noting small gestures, hands adjusting packs, eyes scanning terrain, nervous laughter between recruits. Each detail reinforced the gravity of command. "They trust me with everything," he whispered. "I must not fail." This was the crucible in which Bradley's character and leadership were forged, blending fear, moral responsibility, and strategic vision into a foundation that would carry him through some of the most difficult campaigns of World War II. Finally, on Christmas Day, 1942, Bradley reflected in his personal journal. "Command is more than strategy. It is conscience, judgment, and courage under scrutiny. I fear, yes, but I will act." It was a fear tempered by knowledge, humanity, and empathy. This fear would not weaken him. It would define him as a general who could navigate chaos, guide men to the terror of battle, and make choices that were as humane as they were strategic. By January 1943, the weight of responsibility that had been simmering in Bradley's mind had intensified as Operation Torch's consequences began to ripple to the North African theater. The amphibious landings had already presented logistical nightmares, with thousands of soldiers disembarking onto unfamiliar beaches under the watchful eyes of both Allied and Axis forces. Bradley, stationed at the temporary Allied headquarters in Casablanca, Morocco, meticulously reviewed landing reports sent from beach commanders at Oran, Algiers, and Casablanca itself. The reports painted a vivid picture of chaos and heroism, units pinned down by enemy fire, officers improvising on the spot, and soldiers struggling under the combined pressure of unfamiliar terrain and uncertain command structures. He stared at the maps, lines tracing troop movements, supply routes, and artillery positions, each line representing lives at risk. "Every line drawn is a life," Bradley murmured to himself, feeling the gravity of the battlefield stretch across the parchment. It was in these moments that his fear transformed from a private anxiety into a strategic consciousness, a deep awareness that every decision, delay, or misjudgment could ripple into catastrophe. In the mess of reports, Bradley noted recurring patterns: communication breakdowns, units arriving late or out of sequence, and men exhausted by heat, sand, and stress. At a briefing on January 12, 1943, with Major General Troy Middleton and Brigadier General Lucian Truscott at his side, Bradley asked pointed questions. How soon can the artillery reach the inland roads? Are the supply columns synchronized with infantry movements? What contingencies exist if the enemy counterattacks? The room hummed with tension as officers shuffled papers and exchanged concerned glances. Truscott replied, "Sir, our columns are vulnerable if the French forces choose to resist more aggressively. The terrain complicates supply lines." Bradley, his eyes narrowing, responded, "Then we must plan for redundancy, establish communication fallback routes, and prepare reserves." His tone, calm but resolute, masked the fear gnawing at him. A fear not of failure itself, but the human cost that would follow any misstep. Bradley's fear deepened as he received reports from combat units describing interactions with French forces, some loyal to Vichy authorities, others sympathetic to the Free French under Charles de Gaulle. He read accounts of negotiations, skirmishes, and tense standoffs at ports and inland towns. One intelligence report from January 14, 1943, described a firefight near Bledow where American troops had clashed with French units, resulting in casualties on both sides. Bradley's eyes lingered on the names of the soldiers, imagining their families thousands of miles away. He wrote in his journal that evening, The war is not just between nations. It is between men who are forced into conflict, who trust in orders, and who rely on their commanders for survival. My fear is not cowardice. It is responsibility. The magnitude of command pressed down on him, and he felt the ethical weight of each choice as palpably as the sun on the Moroccan sands. Interactions with other Allied commanders brought both insight and pressure. Lieutenant General Dwight D. Eisenhower, observing Bradley's meticulous attention to detail, offered a mixture of reassurance and challenge. During a meeting on January 16, 1943, Eisenhower leaned over a table covered with sand-strewn maps and said, "Omar, your thoroughness is necessary, but the men on the ground need decisiveness. Hesitation will cost lives." Bradley nodded, feeling the duality of leadership acutely. To balance methodical planning with swift action, he replied, quietly but firmly, "Sir, I understand. My fear does not prevent action. It informs it. I fear in order to act with full awareness of the consequences." Eisenhower's eyes softened, recognizing the integrity in Bradley's words. Yet Bradley knew that every command decision will be scrutinized by allies, enemies, and history itself. The human dimension of command became particularly pressing during briefings with field officers. Colonel Charles Smith reported from the beaches of Oran that soldiers exhibited both valor and trepidation. Men who charged forward with courage but faltered under unexpected machine gun fire. Officers improvising orders when communications failed. Bradley listened intently, visualizing the young faces of American infantrymen in unfamiliar foreign terrain. He recalled a letter from a mother dated December 20th, 1942. "I pray every day for my son's safe return." Bradley felt profound moral weight. His fear was the embodiment of accountability, an understanding that his tactical decisions directly affected human lives and futures. Command, he realized, was a constant negotiation between strategy and conscience. Bradley's reflections often turned to historical precedent. In studying General John Pershing's memoirs and the experiences of World War I, he noted the catastrophic consequences of indecision and poor communication in large-scale operations. Pershing had balanced strict discipline with empathy, maintaining morale while enforcing order. Bradley feared that even with careful planning, the human factor, panic, fatigue, fear, could undermine strategy. In January 1943, during a staff exercise simulating supply chain disruption, he witnessed units collapse under simulated stress, realizing that theoretical command could not fully anticipate human error. His fear was a constant companion, a reminder that leadership demanded both tactical skill and moral vigilance. The logistical realities of North Africa added another layer of anxiety. Roads were narrow and poorly maintained, desert conditions caused mechanical failures, and the desert sun sapped energy from men and machines alike. Bradley studied maps marking water sources, fuel depots, and potential choke points. He consulted with supply officers, questioning, "Are there contingency stockpiles if the convoy is ambushed? Can medical evacuation routes remain clear under fire?" Each question stemmed from fear informed by foresight, a recognition that meticulous preparation could mitigate some, but not all, dangers of combat. His understanding of fear as an operational tool grew, shaping the way he directed strategy, discipline, and care for the men. Bradley's anxiety also intersected with diplomacy. French political officers, Moroccan local authorities, and British liaison staff added layers of complexity. On January 18, 1943, during a tense coordination meeting with British General Kenneth Anderson, Bradley noted differences in operational philosophy. Anderson preferred caution, meticulously planned advances, while Bradley advocated for rapid, decisive action to seize strategic objectives. "Omar," Anderson remarked, "we cannot risk rash moves that endanger civilians and troops alike." Bradley acknowledged a warning, responding, "And yet hesitation can be equally deadly. We must find balance." The moral and strategic tension in these interactions amplified Bradley's sense of responsibility, his fear now intertwined with ethical decision-making under uncertainty. Amidst this, Bradley personally visited the troops in the field. On January 20th, 1943, he walked along the sand of Algiers, observing American soldiers unloading supplies from landing crafts. He listened to their fears, their jokes, their quiet determination. One young corporal confided, "Sir, we've never faced combat like this. but we trust you'll lead us right." Bradley's chest tightened with emotion, the human dimension of his fear crystallizing in that moment. The lives, hopes, and trust of men depended on a capacity to make decisions under pressure. Fear, he realized, was inseparable from duty, moral awareness, and the necessity of courage. He also reflected on the broader strategic context. Reports from German Afrika Korps positions, intelligence intercepts, and reconnaissance flights revealed a calculated, highly disciplined enemy under Rommel's command. Bradley studied every report meticulously, understanding that while American troops were learning, their opponents were battle-hardened. On January 21, 1943, in a meeting with Truscott and Middleton, he noted, "Our men must not only fight, they must adapt. Every misstep by them is a potential disaster for the mission." The stakes elevated his fear beyond personal anxiety, extending it into operational urgency. The juxtaposition of fear and leadership defined Bradley's nights. In private reflection, he considered letters from home, battlefield reports, and staff briefings. "If I miscalculate," he wrote in his journal on January 22, 1943, "the consequences will not only be tactical failure, but lives lost, hopes shattered, and trust broken." His fear was active, shaping decisions, not paralyzing them. This recognition, fear as a tool rather than an obstacle, was central to his developing command philosophy, one rooted in both strategy and humanity. Bradley's internal struggle continued as he coordinated with naval commanders for upcoming landings and supply movements. He debated timing, troop allocation, and risk with Rear Admiral Henry K. Hewitt, analyzing potential delays and enemy interference. Each decision weighed heavily, as the lives of thousands of men rested on precise coordination. Bradley's fear was intertwined with responsibility, requiring vigilance over every operational detail. He frequently reminded himself that errors could not be excused. Accountability was absolute. The final weeks of January 1943 were filled with continuous planning, reconnaissance, and training. Bradley spent long hours with officers reviewing tactical options, analyzing maps, and rehearsing communication protocols. The desert sun bore down on them during field exercises, while evenings were consumed by exhaustive briefings in tented command posts. Bradley's fear had evolved into a constant companion, an analytical, almost creative force that honed decisions and guided preparation. It was fear transformed into disciplined awareness, sharpening both moral and tactical judgment. By the end of January, Bradley had begun to integrate lessons from these early operations, his fear tempered by observation, study, and dialogue with peers. Yet the awareness of responsibility never left him. On January 31, 1943, he wrote in his journal, "Fear is not my weakness. It is the conscience of command. It informs every decision, every plan, every order. To lead is to fear, to act, and to accept the consequences." In these words, Bradley encapsulated the essence of leadership under fire. Fear was not to be hidden or denied, but embraced as a moral and strategic guide. February 1943 brought a tense clarity to Bradley's command as Operation Torch continued unfolding across the North African theater. From his headquarters in Algiers, Bradley meticulously monitored every landing, patrol, and convoy moving inland from the Mediterranean coast. The Allied forces were a tapestry of American, British, and Free French troops, each with varying levels of experience and morale. The complexity of coordinating multiple national armies under one command weighed heavily on Bradley. Maps sprawled across the table, dotted with red and blue markers representing troop movements, supply lines, and enemy positions. He ran his hand over the worn surface of a map detailing Kasserine Pass, the site where intelligence indicated German and Italian forces could mount a counterattack. He felt the gnawing weight of fear, not of the enemy itself, but his responsibility toward the men whose lives were tethered to every decision he made. One mistake, he whispered to himself, and this could become a slaughter of inexperience. This fear was alive, sharp, and unrelenting, guiding him toward precision and moral accountability. The morning of February 3, 1943, found Bradley in a strategic briefing with his closest staff, Truscott, Middleton, and intelligence officers who had scouted Axis movements. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Smith read aloud reports of German reconnaissance, probing weak points in American positions. Bradley's eyes darted between lines of text, each statistic and observation representing real soldiers standing in harsh desert terrain. He asked pointedly, "Where are reserves? Can we reinforce without overextending supply lines? How quickly can artillery support respond if the Germans exploit gaps?" The staff shuffled papers nervously. They understood that Bradley's fear was not paralysis. It was hypertension to every operational detail. This fear, paradoxically, lent his decisions a moral and tactical depth rare among commanders. As he traced potential enemy movements on the map, he imagined soldiers' faces, young men from Kansas, Ohio, and the Carolinas, bracing themselves against the desert sun while their lives hung on the outcomes of his choices. Bradley's concern extended beyond military mechanics to the human psyche of his troops. Letters from soldiers arrived at headquarters almost daily, providing intimate insights into the strain of battle and anticipation of combat. On February 5, 1943, one letter from Private Henry Thompson of the 1st Infantry Division described the exhaustion of long marches through desert sand and the anxiety of approaching unknown enemy positions. Thompson wrote, "Sir, we trust your judgment, but fear grips us as much as the heat. Will our training be enough?" Bradley read the words silently, feeling profound empathy that intensified his fear. The responsibility to transform fear into courage became a central theme of his leadership philosophy. He responded in his journal, "Every man's life depends on my awareness. Command is not merely giving orders. It is understanding fear and converting it into decisive, protective action." Field reports painted a chaotic yet heroic scene. During the Kasserine reconnaissance on February 6, 1943, units of the U.S. 1st and 34th Infantry Divisions were engaged in skirmishes with Rommel's Afrika Korps. Soldiers recounted moments of sheer panic interspersed with bravery, often improvising under fire. One lieutenant reported, "Men broke ranks when mortars fell, yet rallied at my shout. I swear, sir, I saw fear in every eye, but also determination." Bradley absorbed these accounts, his chest tightening. Fear for the men's safety was now inseparable from tactical calculation. He instructed Middleton to prioritize reserves at potential points of collapse while ensuring supply lines were maintained, decisions that required balancing aggressive maneuvers with cautious support. Every move was a negotiation with the ever-present reality that human lives were at stake. Bradley also had to navigate the delicate web of alliances. French officers loyal to Vichy France were present in several areas of operation, creating uncertainty and sometimes direct confrontation. On February 8, 1943, a delegation of French officers met with Bradley to coordinate troop movements near Oran. One officer, Colonel Delacroix, remarked, "Our men are willing, but orders from Vichy command complicate timing." Bradley responded with calm authority, "I understand, Colonel, but our priority must be the safety and cohesion of all forces." Miscommunication could cost lives. In his private journal, he noted, "Leadership is not only about strategy. It is about diplomacy, empathy, and the foresight to anticipate human error and political complication." The fear that had once been personal became operational, shaping every interaction with allies and enemies alike. By February 10th, Bradley's anxiety was further amplified by intelligence from British liaison officers detailing Rommel's armor movements near Sidi Bouzid. Maps showed enemy columns poised to exploit any weakness in American lines. Bradley convened an emergency war council, his normally calm voice carrying urgency. If Rommel attacks here, the consequences will be catastrophic unless reserves are positioned preemptively. We must anticipate the enemy, not react. He watched the young officers, noting the tension and doubt in their eyes. This awareness, combined with his empathy for soldiers on the front lines, intensified his fear, making it a guiding principle rather than a hindrance. He considered the human cost of hesitation and the moral imperative of foresight. The desert environment itself added unpredictable challenges. Harsh sunlight, temperatures exceeding 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and sandstorms interfered with visibility, supply movement, and morale. On February 11th, Bradley conducted an inspection of forward units, walking alongside soldiers navigating a sand-choked track under blazing sun. One private complained, "Sir, it's unbearable, but we push forward." Bradley acknowledged the remark with a nod, aware that environmental conditions could amplify mistakes, fatigue, and fear. he recorded in his journal. Command is a test of resilience, not only for myself but for those who rely on my foresight and guidance. Fear sharpens attention, reminding me that oversight may cost lives. Bradley's fear also intersected with self-reflection. As he studied maps, reports, and letters late into night on February 12, 1943, he considered his personal limitations and mortality. The complexity of coordinating men, supplies, and strategy across vast terrain was overwhelming, yet he understood that action, even under fear, was the only path to survival and success. In conversations with Eisenhower during evening briefings, Bradley admitted candidly, "I fear making a wrong call, but inaction is deadlier than error." Eisenhower's measured gaze and steady voice responded, "Omar, it is precisely your awareness of consequence that will save lives. Fear is your guide, not your jailer." The weeks that followed involved constant evaluation of unit cohesion, supply efficiency, and enemy reconnaissance. On February 14th, Bradley convened a meeting with his artillery commanders to discuss shelling schedules in anticipation of Rommel's movements. The discussion was tense. Miscommunication could result in friendly fire. Bradley pressed each officer for specifics, ensuring redundancy in communication, contingency plans for equipment failure, and alignment with infantry movements. His meticulous attention to detail, born from fear and empathy, reflected a command philosophy deeply rooted in responsibility to both mission and men. Bradley's personal interactions with soldiers reinforced the human aspect of command. On February 15, 1943, he walked among the troops near Debessa, observing exhausted faces, blistered hands, and nervous eyes. One young private muttered, "Sir, we trust your decisions, but the fear is real." Bradley placed a hand on his shoulder, replying softly, "I feel it too. That is why we prepare, adapt, and protect one another. Courage grows in fear's presence, not absence." This intimate connection with the troops intensified Bradley's awareness of his own fear, transforming it into a source of empathy, moral compass, and tactical clarity. Operational planning reached critical intensity by mid-February. Bradley orchestrated the movement of multiple divisions, coordinating with naval and air support for inland assaults. Every adjustment of a unit's position involved recalculation of supply routes, communication lines, and casualty evacuation plans. His fear of miscalculation heightened the precision of orders, compelling him to envision multiple outcomes for each decision. The desert battlefield, mapped on paper and internalized in Bradley's mind, became a theater where human endurance, tactical ingenuity, and moral responsibility converged in a daily test of leadership. By February 20th, 1943, intelligence suggested Rommel's Africa Corps might attempt a concentrated strike at Thala. Bradley's response was both proactive and measured. He instructed Middleton to preposition reserves while ensuring artillery support could respond to rapid maneuvers. Officers expressed concern over the speed and risk of the plan. Bradley acknowledged risk is inherent but calculated, guided by knowledge and empathy. Hesitation now may cost more than boldness. His fear had matured into a structured lens, guiding action while preserving moral and operational integrity. The culmination of these preparations and anxieties became apparent in late February. Field reports detailed the first encounters at Kasserine Pass. Units pinned by superior firepower, officers improvising under duress, and soldiers displaying remarkable bravery. Bradley analyzed reports, the gravity of each casualty weighing heavily. In conversations with Truscott and Middleton, he noted, "We must learn from each encounter, adjust without delay, and protect our men while advancing our objectives." His fear, sharpened by knowledge, now functioned as a precise instrument of command. Finally, Bradley reflected on the lessons of this operational crucible, the fear he had experienced, the sleepless nights, and the moral responsibility had transformed into actionable wisdom. He recorded on February 28, 1943, "Command is inseparable from fear. It is not absence of doubt, but courage through awareness, empathy, and strategy. Every decision is human, every consequence moral, every victory contingent on understanding both." His words, heavy with experience, illustrated a profound intersection of strategy, humanity, and ethical leadership that defined Omar Bradley's command during one of history's most challenging campaigns. Even as February ended, Bradley's mind remained alive with reflection. Questions lingered. Could he balance caution and decisiveness? Could he inspire courage in the face of fear? Would the man understand the weight of his decisions and the depth of his empathy? How does a leader measure the cost of action versus inaction? These questions, unspoken yet palpable, framed every decision, guiding his strategy, ethics, and personal conscience as a commander navigating the chaos of World War II.